Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us for this webinar to inform you all on the options for consultation on the Tarawera Sewerage Scheme for the annual plan 2025-26. My name is Andrew Morais. I'm the Chief Executive. Got David Jensen here, the CFO of Council, and Stavros Michael, the GM for Infrastructure and Assets. We'll be taking you through a presentation and answering your questions during the next hour or so. If you or your friends haven't been able to join us, you'll be able to access a recording of this webinar throughout our channels. During the webinar, feel free to post any questions. We have a series of questions that have already come through, and at the end of the presentation, we'll be going through the questions and answering them as best we can. If we don't get through to all your questions, we will record them and put them up on our channels for you to have a look at our written answers. We're going to finish this by 6 p.m, but I'm hopeful that we'll get through the presentation and have time for questions. If not, as I said, we'll pick up those questions in due course. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Stavros, who's going to take us through a couple of slides just to orient us with some background on the project. And I'll hand over to Stavros.
Good evening, everybody. Very briefly, I just want to go through a brief introduction. Discussions with the community on a sewage solution for Tarawera began in 2015 in anticipation of the offset plan rule imposed by the Regional Council that came into effect in 2017. A community steering group was set up, and in 2018, that committee recommended installation of low-pressure grinder pumps on properties and to connect to the Rotorua treatment plant via a mains pipeline onto Tarawera Road. Subsequent to that recommendation, the Rotorua Lakes Council adopted the scheme in this draft long-term plan of 2021-2031 long-term plan, and undertaken a number of consultations with the Tarawera community. The majority of those consultations indicated that the vast majority of the community are supportive of the scheme. However, the committee expressed a view and a desire for an improved funding arrangement for the scheme and for the affected property owners. Currently, we are consulting on the Tarawera Sewage Scheme Capital Funding Plan. As you know, protests near Lake Otagai and appeals to the district environment courts have added to all the overall costs, and now the estimated overall cost for the project is about $32.3 million. Current funding received towards the scheme from external sources comprise Ministry of the Environment, $6.5 million, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, $750,000, the Rotorua Lakes Council, $1.485 million, covered by the wider ratepayers. And under the current funding plan, the Rotorua Lakes Council will borrow the remaining funds to be repaid by the ratepayers of Tarawera.
Send up to David Jensen now, take us through the capital rates and some of the questions we are asking you to submit on as part of this consultation.
Good evening, everybody. Within our consultation document, it is proposed that the remainder of the money is to be paid through two rates. So stage one rate being all costs associated with the main trunk infrastructure to the boundary of the property, and a second rate for the costs to actually physically connect inside the property boundary. So stage one rate being all main trunk infrastructure, stage two rate being all costs associated with the connection inside the property boundary. When we're talking about the stage one rate is proposed to be charged to all Tarawera ratepayers, whether or not they're connected to the scheme. So whether or not they pay stage two, it is proposed in the consultation document that they will pay stage one. And that does include vacant sections. So they'll be charged against 550 properties, for 446 properties that are there now, and the allowance for the 104 properties that will occur through growth. The stage 2 rate will only be charged to the ratepayers who have connected to the scheme. It's proposed within the consultation document that Council has received $2 million of better off funding from central government, and the consultation document proposes that that money is distributed among Tarawera ratepayers who agree to the installation of the properties by 1 July 2025. And by doing so, would enable those particular ratepayers to reduce their stage 2 rate by $5,286 per property. So when we look at the way these rates have been calculated, it is these rates, the rate term is assumed to be 25 years. So on day one, when Tarawera ratepayers receive their rates bill, it is assumed on day one that they will be paying on a payment plan. So for ratepayers who wish to pay on a lump sum basis will need to do a service request to just let the rates team know to change their rates bill and change that to a lump sum, but it is assumed on day one the rate term will be for 25 years. The rates also have an assumption that the cost of capital for the 25 years will be 6%, and that's based on Council's long run cost of capital over a 25-year period, just making that cost of capital allowance. And we're assuming, roughly based on what we hear around from the community and our experiences with other schemes, that we're assuming that roughly 50-50, 50% will pay through a lump sum and 50% will pay through the annual charge over 25 years. And just again reiterating that stage 1, the capital rate will be charged to all properties, including vacant land. So within the consultation document, we've prepared 3 options. Option 1 is the status quo with no additional wider community funding. So all additional costs associated with the Tarawera scheme being charged to the homeowner or the ratepayers and the Tarawera catchment. Option 2 makes an allowance for an additional $1 million contribution from the wider community to be funded through the Lakes Enhancement Rate. So option 2, I guess, shifts $1 million of that cost from the directly impacted Tarawera homeowners through to everybody, and that would put everybody else's rates up by that 0.1%. So a little above what we had consulted in the annual plan. Option 3, similar to option 2, but it's 4 million rather than 1 million. So option 3 provides an option where we make an additional 4 million contribution from the wider community towards the cost that will be applicable for the Rotorua Tarawera ratepayers. And the impact of that on everybody who pays that rate would be 0. It would mean that everybody's rates would go up by 0.4%, and I'll elaborate on that a little more clearly in the slide to come. It's important to note that options 2 and 3 would increase the Lakes Enhancement Rate for all ratepayers who pay that rate for 25 years. So shifting that burden for either the 1 million or the 4 million would increase the rates for everybody for 25 years by that 0.1 and 0.4% respectively. So just to deep dive into option 1. Option 1 is the status quo. So option 1 assumes that but option 1 takes into consideration all the external funding that we've received for the scheme. It includes the increased contribution from Council through the LTP process. And under this plan, Tarawera residents will pay $50,315, including GST, which also includes that better off funding subsidy for signing up before that time period. And this is the option that has been included within Council's finances for the consultation period. Option 2 it makes an allowance for Rotorua ratepayers to contribute $1 million into that scheme through the Lakes Enhancement Rate. And the impact of that 1 million contribution would reduce the Tarawera ratepayer contribution to $47,737. So about a $3,000 decrease. It would increase the Lakes enhancement rate, which is paid by most ratepayers in the wider Rotorua community, by $2.80 per year. And that would be an increase in their rates by 0.1% on top of the 7.95% that we are consulting on in the annual plan. Option 3 is, as I mentioned earlier, it makes an allowance for Rotorua ratepayers to contribute $4 million to the scheme through the Lakes enhancement rate. That would reduce the Tarawera ratepayer contribution to $40,000, down from the $50,000 in option 1. So about just over a $10,000 reduction. This would increase the Lakes enhancement rate for all Rotorua ratepayers by $11 per rateable unit per year, and that's an increase of 0.4% per annum. Just hold it there for a second. Look, when we looked at how much of a contribution we would model or present as an option through the consultation period, we were cognizant that in previous schemes, there's roughly been about a 50-50 split between the costs that were borne by the homeowners directly and the external or council contributions. So at the time of consultation, the reason $4 million was chosen as an option was to get roughly to that 50-50 split, which would mean that 50% would be borne by the residents of Tarawera and 50% funded through other means. And there's a table here on just summarising some of the numbers I've described in those options. Option 1 being the status quo. Option 2 being the $1 million contribution through the Lakes enhancement rate, and option 3 being the $4 million contribution from the Lakes enhancement rate.
So the consultation period closes on the 5th of May. So I really encourage you all to make submissions. I'll also point out that we are trialing this new platform and really hope that you found this useful. Encourage you to sign up, create an account, log in, and indicate what projects you'd like to follow going forward. So that way we can have some really good engagement with all of you. The next, as you can see, there's a number of options there for making submissions. Ideally, we make it through this platform because that helps us be really concise about the submissions. Slide. And then just again to remind you that over the course of May, councillors, Rotorua Lakes councillors will be considering the submissions and conducting hearings and making a decision on how to, or which option or which variation of the options to choose so that they can make a decision and then strike the rate along with the adoption of the annual plan, which happens at the end of June. So I'll open up for questions now. As I said, I've received a number of questions, which I will read through that. The first question I've got is, what happens if I can't afford the 25-year rate? So I've had that question a number of times. I'll just answer it briefly and see if the CFO has any other additions to make. So council has a range of policies that address hardship for people who struggle to make any rate payments. We would really encourage anyone who is in that situation, finds that burdensome or difficulty, to reach out to us before you make any significant life decisions about your property. And then our rating team will be able to help you with either an alternative plan or some other options. Again, we have significant experience working through people and customers who've had challenges with their rates bill, and we will be able to work with you to come up with some accommodation. Okay, the second question I've got is, how can I indicate if I want to sign up to the scheme by 30th of June if the locality plans are not ready by then and I don't want to miss out? So we will be in touch with every property and give you the option of indicating whether you wish to join up to the scheme or not. And if you are able, and by that stage, obviously, you'll have clarity of the total cost of the scheme, both stage 1 and stage 2. And if you get your response to those forms or those letters back to us, we will register your property as being wanting to participate, and therefore you will enjoy the benefits of being connected within the fixed price that that council is offering. I just want to also indicate there that when we set the rate, it is effectively, not absolutely, but effectively a fixed fee for your property. So council will take the delivery risk or any further costs incurred after that time. So that is the advantage, and that is the reason we are bringing this discussion forward by a year, and so that those rates can be fixed. I'll just ask Stavros, anything to add to that, Stavros?
No.
Keep going. Okay. There's a question around the regional council. So our council intends to request additional funding from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. And you can also support that by writing into the regional council, writing into your Rotorua representatives or to the chair of the regional council, and request additional funding from the wider Bay of Plenty regional ratepayers to contribute to this scheme, recognizing the benefit to the lake water quality at Lake Tarawera and the wider responsibility the regional council has for lake water quality. So you can do that, and we obviously elected members will be in a better position to provide support for from Rotorua ratepayers if it's also matched by wider regional council ratepayers. Got a question about the Rotokakahi costs and how much of that will be removed from this project. We don't have those details yet, but through council's deliberations, they will consider how much of those costs can be removed from this project. The number of $32.3 million that's in front of you at the moment includes our maximum assumptions of what those costs will include. And by the time councillors are deliberating, they will have the final cost, because the work we expect will be complete by that stage. And then that will be reflected in their deliberations as well. Okay. I'm trying to get through these questions. There was a question about whether a 10 or 25-year period is offered. As David mentioned, it is 25 years, and that will be the default. So as David mentioned, if you want to pay a lump sum, you need to reach out to our rating team when you get your rates bill, and we can convert that into a lump sum payment. That obviously will not attract the 6% cost of capital. You will pay the lump sum immediately. We've also got a question about allocation of the Better Off funding, the $2.05 million. Is it a fixed figure per installation? Yes, that is effectively a fixed figure per installation. And that figure has been designed with the intent that all property owners have the opportunity to avail themselves of that subsidy towards the stage 2 cost. If there are significant funds remaining, then council will consider how that is allocated. But again, the assumption at this point is that that is a fixed cost. And the last question I've got is, and then we'll get to the ones on the screen, is does council have any plans to apply differential target rate pricing to any stage 2 properties? So does council intend to charge different property owners different amounts for the stage 2 installation? The answer is no. The answer is that the stage 2 rate will be a uniform rate. What that means is the costs are harmonized, so every ratepayer will pay the same amount, but it also means that we take on the delivery risk. Council and our contractors will take on the delivery risk after the 30th of June. The rate will be fixed. Our ratepayers will pay the fixed amount, and then it's up to us to deliver it. Okay, we've got a couple of other questions. Question 50/50 is incorrect. Rotorua contributed 25.8%. Can Lake Tarawera ratepayers pay the same contribution? I'll just start by saying that there was a funding deed with central government that provided external funds towards that particular sewage scheme at Rotorua. That deed does not have any funding towards Lake Tarawera allocated at this stage. I'll open up to either Stavros or David to add to that if you wish.
Yeah, just another element for the Rotorua. It need to be borne in mind that the East Rotorua received a significant grant from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council in the order of $8.4 million, and the Rotorua component received a grant from the Ministry of Health of $4.4 million. In line with earlier conversations and discussions, obviously the Tarawera property owners have an opportunity to perhaps exercise their legitimate right and seek an approach to the Bay of Plenty Regional Council to contribute more money towards the scheme, as they have done in East Rotorua. But the difference here is the difference funded between the Ministry of Health and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council.
The next question I've got, the Associate Minister of the Environment said 19th February, RLC is aware of cost burdens such projects create for their ratepayers and continue to explore a range of options to further alleviate the cost burden for Tarawera ratepayers. What are those options? So those options are what are before us at the moment in the annual plan. That is to share that burden widely amongst other ratepayers. The question is, of course, which ratepayers. So if they are shared across the region, that's all of the Bay of Plenty region, then that needs to come from the regional council. That's not what this council can do anything about, but as I mentioned, that's the opportunity to advocate to the regional council for additional funding through the regional council. What this council can do is provide additional funding, consider additional funding from the Rotorua ratepayers, which they will do through this annual plan deliberation. So that's what we're doing. RLC doesn't have any other funding sources that are available here. We have spoken with central government. It's been made clear to us that there are no other central government funds. And so we are exploring sharing those costs with the rest of the Rotorua ratepayers to alleviate the cost to Tarawera ratepayers. Is participation in stage 2 optional? I might ask Stavros to answer that question.
Participation in stage 2 is not optional for 2 reasons. One is that the operation of current septic tanks is no longer compliant with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council's rules. And if you do not participate in stage 2, you do need to have an approved OSET system. And the Bay of Plenty Regional Council communicated in a number of occasions that in the presence of a reticulation system, they are unlikely to issue a resource consent for an OSET system. At the same time, the Rotorua Lakes Council, having installed the reticulation system, has the ability to require property owners to connect to that system. What is going to be optional, I think is outlined earlier by our chief executive, is that if you opt to install stage 2 as part and parcel of that general scheme, then obviously property owners enjoy the benefit of scale and receive their funding assistance associated with that stage 2. If property owners opt not to participate at this point in time, they will still be required to connect and install the stage 2, but they will do it at their own exclusive costs without receiving the benefit of the wider efficiency of scale.
And the next question is, when does RLC propose to put a fixed cost on the sewage scheme? So this process will lead to a fixed cost on the sewage scheme as far as the ratepayers are concerned.
With this question, it's important to note that we are consulting on those 3 different options and also working through the final costs associated with the Rotorua delays. It's really important that we hear as much of our community voice through the submission process as possible, so that council can make a informed decision based on community views when it comes to choosing one of those options. So again, encouraging you to refer to that timeline and put a submission in so that we can consider that when we are fixing the cost on the sewerage scheme.
Yeah, thank you, David. And so just to be clear, this process will fix the cost for Tarawera ratepayers. What that cost will be, I can't tell. That's what the deliberations of council will yield. And when the annual plan is adopted towards the end of June, the cost will be fixed for you. That is the plan. That is why we're doing this work, and that's why we are seeking your views here. When will RLC have the results of the Lake Rotorua quantity survey and the independent financial audit for Lake Tarawera Sewerage Scheme?
I assume the quantity survey for Rotorua is meant to address the independent audit administered for the Environment Commission. That report, I understand, is going to be presented to the Minister of the Environment in the end of next week. And after that, the Ministry of the Environment officers will supply us with that independent assessment made by the quantity surveyor before it's presented to the Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group in this next meeting, which is, I think, is early June. The independent financial audit for Lake Tarawera, I assume it means it's related to the MFE funding of $6.5 million that contains a clause that requires an independent audit. We are in consultation now with the Ministry of the Environment, and we are working in that independent audit to be provided to the MFE before the end of June, which is the time frame for using the $6.5 million support that the MFE provided for the scheme.
Okay, and why did stage 2 costs increase from the capital project plan from 2020?
I cannot follow that. I think stage 2 in 2020, it related to the estimates before the designs were undertaken. And as we have notified earlier in a letter to all the committee in July 2022, the council decided not to accept the estimate at that point in time and proceed to design an independent tenders. And those tenders closed in September 2023, and the council adopted tenders of $11.8 million.
Maybe, as we mentioned earlier, the project was adopted as part of the 2021-31 long-term plan. So we will take it as an action to review the discrepancy, if any, between the numbers for stage 2 in that plan and what we're looking at now. And we will explain that, put that on the website, on our channels. Next question was, were there any surplus funds from other sewage schemes that could be transferred to Lake Tarawera Sewage Scheme? Surplus funds, CFO?
No.
Any? Unfortunately, none of the other sewage schemes had resultant surpluses that could at all. There is nothing that we can transfer to the Tarawera scheme, unfortunately.
If I can elaborate a little bit onto that, all previous reticulation schemes were part of the Rotorua Lakes funded deed, and that funding that came from external sources like the deeds, it was conditional upon funding 50% of the net actual costs of each project. So there were no surplus funds. As each individual scheme was completed, the actual costs were submitted to the Ministry of the Environment, and 50% contribution was received. So there was no surplus funding allocated to any of those earlier schemes, other than a contribution to the actual costs.
Okay, question, will the capital option be tax deductible for investors?
Great question. I would recommend for ratepayers who do use the property for investment purposes to gain their own tax advice on how they would prefer to treat that. It's individual tax advice probably isn't something that council can offer, unfortunately.
Okay, got a question. Why wasn't the 31.78 million rate swap transfer and 4 million interest free not included in the annual plan? Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. So this refers to the regional council ostensibly reducing their rates charged to regional council ratepayers who live in the Rotorua district by that amount over 10 years. So it's not that scheme has been declined. There isn't the option of swapping rates. Councillors at Rotorua Lakes Council need to decide what rates to charge our ratepayers, and that's what they're doing through this annual plan process. The Bay of Plenty Regional Council chose to reduce or change how they did some of those rates last year, not this year, and not in any agreement with our councillors in order to offset these costs to these Tarawera ratepayers. So let's put aside the rate swap transfer terminology. The option of the $4 million access from the regional council is still a possibility. That's something that our councillors need to deliberate on. And again, if you're supportive of that, please submit to the annual plan and say so. It's through that process that our councillors will have a discussion with the regional council, and if possible, will if they choose to accept that, they will do so through that discussion. Anything else to add? Not that one? No. We've got a question, why should Tarawera ratepayers pay for the Lake Rotorua conflict? This should be part of council's delivery risk. So can I say, just on that, and take the opportunity to say that the consultation to mitigate this delivery risk has been done quite extensively. There has been a choice by some individuals to add to the cost, and unfortunately, those costs fall on council. The question as to whether that should fall on Tarawera ratepayers or the wider ratepayers is entirely valid, and that is one of the factors that this council will consider. As we indicated, the option 3, as originally designed, was intended to reduce the cost to 50% by individual ratepayers. Since then, there have been additional costs arising from the delay and the Environment Court decision. So council will consider, again, through this annual plan process, how much of that cost can be absorbed by council as an operational expense and how much is capitalizable. So fair element of that's fair question, and we'll try and address that through this annual plan deliberation process. If all properties pay the same stage 1 costs, then are we subsidizing the quadruplex council LPGP as required at the landing and in other locations? To take that.
Well, I think firstly it's incorrect to link the LPGP with the stage 1. Stage 1 is a cost distributed uniformly to 550 properties. That is a mains reticulation system, the main rising main pipes, and the pump stations to connect to the Rotorua treatment plant. Where installations quadruplex LPGP are required, then those stations, which they're not significant in number, is part and parcel of what we call a community shared scheme. There are some properties, obviously, they are a bit further away from the mains lines, and there are some properties that are closer to the main lines. A decision has been made for all earlier schemes for the cost to be social normalized for all the benefiting properties. We are aware of only one significant commercial property in the Tarawera area where they will pay a standalone financial contribution because they require extensive on-property installations, and that property will pay its actual cost instead of the normalized rate for everyone else. The rest of them will be socialized and normalized between all 446 properties for stage 2. Stage 1 is divided by 550 properties and is the same for everyone.
Okay, if each property is assessed no longer on HUE, but now is advised based on a number of WC PANs, then how can each property pay the same?
Look, I'm interpreting this question to mean the base of the rate being the way the rate is structured for especially for stage 2 is by the number of connections. Most properties will have one connection, and will be charged one rate. It is not based on the number of water closets or pans, so it's a separate. It's not a consideration when we're charging what each Tarawera resident would pay under stage 2. It is a charge per connection, not per dwelling.
Okay, thank you, David. If option 3 is adopted, will it be allocated to stage 1 or stage 2? Stage 2 is the plan at the moment. Why can't district ratepayers contribute towards the same towards Lake Tarawera scheme as they did to Rotorua scheme, as they equally use Lake Tarawera, if not more so? Mike asked Stavros to add to this, but I'll repeat again that Lake Rotorua scheme attracted significant deed funding from the Rotorua Lake settlement deed, as well as the regional council, as well as from the Ministry of Health. And I don't, maybe Stavros, do you have anything to add to that question?
No, as I said, the difference between the Tarawera scheme and Rotorua is because that scheme received funding assistance based on the deed of 50% of the actual cost for Rotorua, and based on the fact that the Bay of Plenty Regional Council contributed about $8.4 million for Rotorua, and the Ministry of Health another $4.4 million for Rotorua. Those funding assistance levels are not available for Tarawera other than the freshwater funds from the Ministry of the Environment and the contributions the council is proposing to make to this scheme, and obviously subject to public consultation, the amount of money that the rest of the community will help to fund the final cost of the scheme.
About the next one, the Freshwater Improvement Fund Agreement said that RLC had formal approval by 440 property owners. How did RLC obtain that approval? I might just skip to the next question because that does not appear related to the consultation topic.
Well, what I can say from here is that the Ministry of the Environment have entered into a funding agreement with the Rotorua Lakes Council to the value of $6.5 million. That funding obviously helps to reduce the net cost to the property owners, and we are comfortable with the funding date, and as is allocated to stage 1 of the project.
In the Freshwater Improvement Fund Agreement, the external funding was specified as $0.75 million from Regional Council and $15.25 from RLC. What was the source of the external funding? I am not sure what that 15.2 million refers to. We might have to come back to that question. Sorry. Okay, we've got, why is the benefit of water quality at Lake Tarawera being managed by council as a private benefit to Tarawera ratepayers rather than as a club or public benefit with more equitable ratepayer burden across all ratepayers? That is, it is not just Tarawera ratepayers that enjoy the lake. Look, again, this is exactly the question that our councillors are grappling with. How should the cost be distributed widely across all ratepayers, or primarily borne by the ratepayers of the district? Again, please submit your views so that the elected members can consider it. It isn't for us to answer that question, really. it's part of the capital funding plan for councillors to consider and decide upon. Understand? Each property is only one. So there's a question on the number of connections and properties. So just to clarify, that.
The low pressure grinder pumps are calibrated to accommodate an estimated use of that house. There are provisions where let's say a granny flat or a subsidiary building within attached to the house, another 60 or 70 square meters, contains another bedroom and so on. And that can be accommodated with a single grinder pump. There will be only a single connection. If a house is of such scale that requires two grinder pumps or duplex, again, a duplex will require one single connection. If it requires an additional grinder pump, then obviously the second connection, but I'm not aware of any properties of that scale that requires a second connection.
Okay, how much are district ratepayers contributing each year to the Rotorua scheme? Is it greater than the $11.20? They have to contribute as the annual plan, $4 million option 3. It's a good question. I'm not sure if the CFO can answer that. Yeah, we'll try and see if David can rustle that up. Was there any additional rate applied to general ratepayers for the Lake Rotorua wastewater scheme, similar to the proposed increase scheme in the council's consultation document? So I think in short, the answer is yes. As part of the long-term plan last year, councillors voted to add additional subsidies that were paid for by the Lakes Enhancement Rate over time. So yes, and that is part of last year's long-term plan decision. Why is council not working with the government to get Lake Tarawera added as a priority lake and part of the deed to get funding towards the scheme? So we are, and it was taken to a Rotorua Lakes, Tarawera Lake Strategy Group meeting, and that is a very complex activity to get Lake Tarawera added to the deed. The rest of the strategy group partners saw some merit in that view, but also need to consider other factors. And so that the Tarawera Lake Strategy Group is the platform that is advancing that idea slowly and over time. So I just want to be clear that it is not up to council. It is for council and regional council and Tarawera Lakes Trust to work together to make that change, and we are doing that. We've got some questions about lake water quality and improvements. I'm going to park that question because that isn't really what this consultation topic is about. It's about how this scheme is funded. So I want to see if David has an answer to the question.
So when we, through the long-term plan process, we consulted on an option for Lake Rotorua around a $10 million contribution from the Lakes Enhancement Rate towards the cost of the scheme at Rotorua. That was to match a loan that we were given through the Ministry for the Environment, which had to be repaid within 10 years. So essentially, this was a 10-year contribution of $10 million, which equates to $37 per property. So there's a difference here between on the time period for Rotorua. That rate was the rate increases by $37 for 10 years. Under what we're proposing for Tarawera, for option 3, it would be $4 million over 25 years, which is an $11 contribution for those 25 years. So slightly different dollar amounts and also slightly different timeframes.
Thanks, David. So we've got a question. Why is there not an option to spread the cost across all ratepayers? All options you have proposed put the majority of burden on Tarawera residents. So I'm going to interpret that question as meaning, why can't the full cost of the scheme be borne by all wider ratepayers? There's nothing to stop council from making that decision. This wasn't one of the options that councillors asked us to put forward as a option because it would, for various reasons, but it's important to note that that would put it out of kilter with all of the other reticulation schemes we have done in the past, although I don't know if anyone has any further comments on that. The councillors can make that decision, and if that is your view, you might want to submit on that. I have answered why this wasn't put forward as one of the options. Okay. Okay, we've clearly got someone who's interested in discussions on low pressure grinder pumps. How many bedrooms would trigger an additional low pressure grinder pump and hence another connection?
I'm not entirely sure how the bedrooms are related to the low pressure grinder pump, but I assume the question is, how much demand from a house would require the exploration for a larger, or a second, local, low pressure grinder pump. Then, as I said, for the average house, as far as we know, in Tarawera, there are very few houses that require such consideration.
Any more questions? I don't see any other questions related to the topic at the moment. So I will just maybe end by thanking everyone for their time. It's how many people do we have? Have we had on this? So we've had 42 people on this. It's a great start. Please encourage you again to make your submissions to council. That is the best way for councillors to consider your views and take them into account when they make a decision. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks to all of the ratepayers who've contributed towards this discussion, both in this meeting and formally. Thank you to staff, Stavros and David. Have a good evening, everyone.